Hello guys, tonight's story isn't about carriages or corsets. It's about something harsher, quieter, and often forgotten. It's the side of history that lived in basements and back alleys, that never wrote books and never had time to read them. So before you drift off, give this video a like if it earns it, and subscribe if you enjoy stories like this. Now, dim the lights. Let the air settle around you, and if you have a blanket, pull it close, because tonight we're heading into the coal black heart of the industrial London. Not the part with opera houses and gentlemen's clubs, but the part that woke before dawn, coughed up soot, and prayed for one more crust of bread. At the center of it all, a place called the Workhouse. Congratulations. You've just stepped into a chapter of history that many didn't survive, but still deserves to be remembered. Imagine it. You are 9 years old. You wake to cold. Not the kind that merely bites your skin, but the kind that settles in your bones and never quite leaves. The bed beneath you is wooden, not slatted, not soft, just flat like a table, and shared, perhaps, with two other children you barely know. The blanket is thin. It smells of mildew. Your feet poke out from underneath it, numb and damp. Then, the bell rings. It's not a gentle chime. It's harsh. A clatter of metal that echoes through the stone corridors, shaking you from whatever poor sleep you manage to find. It's 5 a.m. and your day has already begun. You swing your legs over the side of the board. The floor is wet, always, either from leaking roofs or from the careless footsteps of those who've already passed through. No shoes, not today. Your only pair has worn through at the heel, and the soles flap like tongues when you walk. But you walk anyway, because if you don't, the overseer will come, and he carries a stick. Breakfast is gruel, a watery paste, barely warm, served from a pot so dented it leans to one side. You get a ladle's worth. No more. Eat too slowly, and it's taken from you. Eat too fast, and your stomach turns from the shock. The smell of the room is a mix of smoke, sweat, and something faintly like vinegar. There are no spoons. You slurp from the bowl. You don't remember when you last had something that tasted of anything. There's no time to linger, no time for stories, no time to dream, because you've already heard the second bell. Time to work. You shuffle down a corridor that smells of oil and damp wool. Barefoot, silent. The other children do the same. There's no talking in the halls. Not unless you want trouble. The last boy who whispered during the walk to the factory wing got his knuckles strapped. Hard. He doesn't whisper anymore. You pass a narrow door and the air changes. It hums. A dull, relentless vibration. It smells like grease and dust and something faintly burning. This is the spinning room, where the machines live. Inside are rows of mechanical looms, not towering, as you might imagine, but hunched like beasts at rest. Each one spins, pulls, and twists thread from cotton or wool. The noise is not sharp, it's constant. A blanket of sound, throbbing in the chest, ticking behind the eyes. It never stops. Even when you're not working. Your job? To crawl underneath. You're small. That's why you were chosen. Not because you're good. Not because you're clever. Because you're small enough to fit between the moving parts, without jamming the machine. You lie flat on your belly. The floor is slick with lint and old oil, and your task is to pick up the waste fibers, the threads that drop, snag, or tangle. You gather them in silence. fingers moving like insects, always aware of the gears just inches from your skin. The older children tell you a rhyme. Fingers in, fingers out, never let the wheel find snout. Eyes on gears, not on ground, or you'll never leave this round. It's not a joke, not really. There are stories of a girl named Eliza who lost 2 fingers in her first week, of a boy whose hair got caught in a bobbin. He left. No one says where he went. You think about him when you sleep, or try to. There's no clock here, only bells and the hum of machines. You work until your arms ache, until the air feels thick with thread, until your knees are raw from crawling. Then the bell rings again. Time to stand, stretch, move to the next task, but not to rest, not yet. Next is the carding room, where dust floats like snow, and the air scratches your lungs. You walk down another corridor. Your legs don't ache yet, not because they're rested, but because you've forgotten what it feels like for them not to ache. The floor shifts beneath you. It's wooden here, and worn smooth in strange serpentine lines, where feet have passed again and again in the same motion. For years, the smell changes. Less grease, more dust, dry, chalky. You cough, softly. This is the carding room, and it's not loud. The machines here are quieter, but the danger isn't gone. It just wears a softer face. Carding is the process of brushing raw fibers, taking coarse, unrefined clumps of cotton or wool, and teasing them into soft strands. The machines do most of the work, but it's your job to feed them. You stand before a tool machine with rows of metal teeth, not sharp like knives, but cruel in their own way. You are handed a clump of raw cotton, matted, greyish, still speckled with seed and debris. You place it into the feeder, slow, steady. Too fast, and the teeth jam. Too slow, and the overseer notices. His eyes are always watching. As the cotton disappears into the machine, a cloud of lint rises. Soft, almost beautiful. Like the breath of an old pillow. But it doesn't float away. It stays. It hangs in the air, coating your throat, your lashes, the inside of your nose. You learn to breathe differently, shallow, through your teeth. It doesn't help much. There's no ventilation, no windows, only the sound of brushing metal, and the slow march of children doing the same task beside you. Some wear rags around their mouths. Most do not. You see older girls whose voices have gone soft and hoarse, not from shouting, from breathing. It's called mill cough. A constant rasp, a tickle that never leaves. You keep your eyes on your hands, on the fibers. Sometimes the machine snarls, spits the cotton back at you in a clump. You learn to smile when it happens, so the overseer doesn't think you're lazy, but you're not smiling. Not really. Hours pass. The bell rings. Not the lunch bell. Just a signal to rotate, to move on. You're lucky. Some get stuck here all day. Now it's time for picking waste. The lowest task. The kind given to those too small for the machines. The workhouse floor has many levels, and near the bottom, not in status but in height, you'll find the task of picking waste. You're sent to a narrow space behind the main spinners. The air here is still the light dim. No windows, just gas lamps on the wall, hissing gently. The overseer points to a wooden crate and a low basket. You nod, because words aren't needed. You know what comes next. The job is simple, in theory. Sort cotton waste by hand. Find the usable strands, the clean ones, the ones not yet ruined by machine oil or dust. Separate them, bundle them, repeat. But the bins are low, too low for a bench, too high to do the work standing. So you crouch, knees folded, back bent, neck down, and you stay like that for hours. The dust is worst here because it doesn't move. There's no draft, no opening. The cotton bits cling to your sleeves, to your ears, to your eyelashes until the world goes blurry. Your fingers begin to feel numb, not from cold, from repetition, from pulling the same motion again and again, until the muscles don't even bother complaining anymore. Some kids hum to themselves, quietly, just enough to stay awake, because if your head nods, even once, there's a snap of the stick, a barked word, or worse, your meal taken away. Food is leverage in the workhouse. Warmth is a privilege. Rest is a reward you don't always receive. Sometimes older boys will pass by, heading to the loading docks, and they glance at you, not with sympathy. Not really, just recognition. They used to sit where you sit, bend how you bend, and they know you're not weak, you're just new. And the workhouse doesn't care if you're new. You shift your weight, one leg asleep, spine aching, but you don't stand. Not yet, because the next bell hasn't rung. And in the workhouse, you don't move until the bell says so. The bell finally rings. The sound is sharp, but softer this time. Not the bell for wake-up or rotation. This is the meal bell. You rise slowly, legs tingling, back stiff, and you join the line. A shuffling row of children and adults, silent as shadows, all heading toward the same low-ceiling dining room. You've been here before, twice today already, but that doesn't mean you'll be fed. There's a long table made from rough timber, splintered in places, stained in others. You sit only when told. The older children go first. At the head of the room, there's a pot. Iron, always iron. Steam curls from it, but it's not a rich smell. Not stew, not soup, just gruel again. Oats, boiled in water. No salt, no milk, just enough to be warm. Rarely enough to be filling. You hold your tin bowl in both hands. Feel its slight warmth. There's a strange comfort in that. A warmth that doesn't reach your belly, but settles in your palms briefly. A scoop is ladled in. Thick, grey, and barely stirred. You shuffle back to your place, sit on the bench, and wait. Not for prayer, just for the signal. When the warden nods, you begin. You eat quickly, not because you're greedy, because time is rationed. You get 10 minutes, maybe less. And if you're too slow, your bowl is taken. If you drop it, there's no replacement. If you ask for more, you'll be reminded of the rules. No second servings, no trades, just what's given. Some of the older boys whisper to each other. About Sundays, about a rumour of beef fat being stirred into the pot. Once a month, when the inspector comes. You don't know if it's true. You've never tasted beef. Only the memory of it, from before, from home, or what's left of it. You glance across the table. A girl is licking her spoon, slowly. Not because she's savouring, because it's all she has left. You do the same. Not a word is spoken. Not one. Because here, even mealtime feels borrowed. The bell rings again. Time to go. Time to work off the meal. The meal is over. But it never felt like a break. More like a a pause in the sentence of the day. A comma, not a period. You shuffle back through the corridors. The gruel sits heavy in your belly, not nourishing, just filling space. There's no stretching, no moment to catch your breath. Just a change in room, a change in task. The overseer is already waiting. He stands near the carding room's entrance. Same man as always. Long coat, tall boots, a wooden cane in one hand. Not for walking. His eyes are pale, and you can never tell where he's looking, but you always feel seen. He doesn't speak often, doesn't need to. His presence speaks loud enough. The younger children avoid eye contact. The older ones don't bother trying. Everyone moves faster when he's near. Not because he asks, but because the consequences of slowness are written into your memory. Not in bruises, but in withheld bread, cold stares, a report to the matron. The stick rarely needs to be used. Fear is more efficient. Today, the overseer is assigning lint cleaning. You're handed a rag, a bucket of cold water, and led to a series of rafters and floorboards, coated in weeks' worth of cotton dust. The job seems simple. Wipe down the surfaces, but it never is. The dust clings like frost. The wood splinters at odd angles, and the air remains thick with what you're trying to remove. You try to focus. Move your hand in long, even strokes. Keep your head down. Keep your ears open for footsteps. The overseer walks the room slowly. No pattern, no rhythm, just movement. You can hear his boots scraping across the boards. You never know when he'll stop. Behind you, a boy sneezes. Software, but loud enough. The overseer pauses, turns. He doesn't raise his voice, just points to the door. That boy won't eat dinner tonight. You've seen it before. You press the rag down harder. The light begins to shift. Faint rays through grimy panes of glass. Late afternoon. The day is bending toward evening, but the work hasn't ended. Not yet, because before you sleep, you still have to scrub the hall floors. The light has faded, but not enough for rest. You're handed a pail, a rough brush, and a rag. The hallway waits, long, damp. Its stones uneven, each crack holding soot and boot prints from the men who passed through before sunrise. This is the final task of the day, scrubbing the floors. But that doesn't mean it's easy, or short, or quiet. There are no mops, no soap, just water that's already been used twice. Grey, lukewarm, and barely wet enough to lift the grime. You kneel again, because standing isn't how it's done, and you scrub, one stone at a time. The rhythm becomes its own kind of silence. Brush forward, back, forward, back. Move the bucket, wring the cloth, shift your knees, start again. The hallway doesn't change. The filth doesn't end. You clean it. But you know tomorrow, it will look just the same. Behind you, others scrub in rows. You can hear the scrape of bristles, the drip of water, the occasional sniff from a child fighting sleep. Someone coughs, and it echoes too loudly in the stillness. No one speaks. You're too tired for words, and too sore for defiance. The matron passes through at one point. She carries a lantern. She doesn't say anything, but her footsteps slow. You work harder when they do, faster, not sloppier, because sloppiness earns correction. But you make sure the cloth keeps moving, even when your arms shake. A girl beside you stops to flex her fingers. They're red, raw. She'll wrap them in rags tonight. Sleep with her hands curled. But for now, she scrubs again. Because the bell hasn't rung. Not yet. At the far end of the corridor is a staircase. You try not to think about it. How far away it is. How each foot you clean only makes the rest seem longer. But you move forward, stone by stone, line by line, because this is what the end of the day looks like in a workhouse. It isn't rest, it's maintenance. At last, the final bell rings. Not sharp this time. A dull clang. Less an alarm than a dismissal. You're allowed to stop, not congratulated, not thanked, just permitted. The bucket is taken from your hands. The rag dropped in a heap with dozens of others. No one washes them, only waits until they're dry enough to use again. You rise slowly. Your knees ache, your back aches more, and your eyelids feel like iron. The sleeping quarters are upstairs, a long flight of narrow steps, each one worn down in the middle, from thousands of tired feet. You don't speak on the way up. No one does. It's not a rule, just an understanding. Words require energy, and you've spent yours already. The dormitory is wide and cold. The walls are stone, the windows too small to let in the moon. The beds, if they can be called that, are thin mattresses on wooden slats. No pillows, no sheets, only coarse blankets. Rough as burlap, heavy as guilt. You find your spot, always the same one, marked by a dent where your shoulder lies each night. You lie down, not because it's comfortable, but because there's nowhere else to go. Around you, others shift. A few children cough. One boy groans softly, knee pulled to chest from an old injury no one bothers to name. You hear someone sniffle once, maybe from cold, maybe from something else, but they hide it well. No one wants to be the one still crying. After a month in the workhouse, your eyes adjust to the dark, barely. The beams above you seem to press down, heavy, watching, and the silence is not complete. There's always the creak of settling wood, the wind outside, the whisper of breath from dozens of lungs too tired to dream. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow. You don't sink into it. You graze its edge, hovering somewhere between rest and waiting, because part of you is already listening for the next bell, and when it rings, you'll rise again, because in the London workhouse, the day doesn't end. It just folds into the next. His name was Joseph, or at least, that's what the ledger said. No surname, no parents listed, just Joseph, admitted at the age of 6. The record is faded, ink blurred by time, or water, or careless hands. But one thing is clear. He entered the London workhouse in 1839. The rest of his story is not written in words, not at first. It lives in calloused hands, in growth plates stunted by malnutrition, in lungs blackened by dust, in the shape his spine took. Curved unnaturally forward, a boy bent before he ever became a man. Joseph's early days were like many others. He arrived with a thin coat, too short at the wrists, and eyes that stayed wide, even in sleep. The matron noted he didn't speak much, only nodded when spoken to. A quiet child, the kind no one noticed until he was needed. And in a place like this, a quiet child was easy to assign. They put him in the spooling room first, sorting threads too tangled for the older boys to bother with. He worked in silence, not because he feared punishment, but because speaking never got him anything. He made no friends, not because he was cruel, but because cruelty here wasn't loud. It was quiet, casual, the kind you don't even notice after a while. Joseph watched other children come and go. Some grew, some left, some didn't. He just stayed, year after year, until eventually the overseer stopped calling him boy. They called him worker. Joseph was moved to the machine floor when he turned 8. That was the rule. If you were tall enough to reach the top bobbin, you were old enough to serve the wheels. The room was a factory within a factory. Endless belts and clattering gears, pistons that moved without thought. The walls were sweat-stained, not with color, but with the feel of it. Steam hissed through every seam in the wall. The air always felt wet, but never clean. His job was simple. Check the thread as it fed through the spindles. If it snapped, stop the machine. Thread it again, start over. Each break was a delay, and delays meant questions, and questions meant eyes watching. So he became fast, precise. He learned to move with the rhythm of the room, not against it. Joseph's hands became instinct. They moved before his mind could follow. The fingers memorized what the eyes barely saw. Each day blurred into the next. The same path to the floor, the same path back. He ate less now, not because food was scarce, but because chewing took time, and time was always short. The machines grew louder each year, or maybe his ears just grew tired. He could no longer hear the voices around him, only the pulsing of belts, the churn of gears, the occasional scream, not of pain, but of metal. The machines screamed too when they broke. And Joseph's job was to keep them from screaming. He did it well, until his hands no longer looked like a child's hands. They looked like tools, tools built by a place that forgot he was ever a boy. When a child was thin enough and quiet enough and fast enough, they were given a special job. A job that didn't go to the strong or the clever, but to the smallest. Joseph was small, smaller than the others his age. His shoulders were narrow, his arms like reeds. He didn't know it was a promotion. No one told him. They simply pointed to the gap in the floor, to the turning iron shafts beneath the looms, and they said, "You'll go in when it stops." The job was called piecing or scavenging. When a thread snapped or a bolt dropped or a needle fell into the machine, they couldn't stop everything just to fix it, so they sent in the children. Between the gears, under the looms, beneath the belts that spun like snakes overhead. You crawled in. You found the problem. You fixed it, quickly. Because if the machine started again before you were out, you didn't get a second try. Joseph didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He had watched other boys do it before. Some came back out, rubbing their arms. Some didn't come back at all. Sometimes the overseers looked away, for just a moment too long. Sometimes the sound of a snap wasn't metal, but Joseph, he was fast, and the machines, for a time, seemed to respect that. The pulses, the breaths of the spinning floor. He moved like smoke, like thought, in and out. His knees were always bruised, his elbows raw, but he did not complain. Because in the workhouse, you don't complain when you're chosen, even if what you're chosen for might swallow you whole. Sometimes, in the quiet between tasks, he would rest his head against the machine, feel it hum, feel it lev. And for just a moment, it didn't feel like he was inside the factory. It felt like the factory was inside him, and that it would never leave. Joseph never raised his hand, never spoke out of turn, but the system noticed him anyway. Not for his voice, but for his wear. He began to appear more frequently in the ledger, The thick book kept by the matron, bound in cracking leather, its corners softened by time and routine. Each child had a row, a name, a date, an age, then marks, small ones, tiny notations for illness, injuries, shifts missed or meals declined. And Joseph's row, once thin and quiet, began to collect ink, bruising along the forearms, limping after second rotation, finger swollen, possible fracture, refused breakfast twice. The marks weren't alarms, they weren't flags, they were observations, quiet ones, written in margins. The matron did not stop him from working. The overseer did not pull him aside, because a boy like Joseph was still more useful broken than absent. There was no doctor, not really, only a visiting man, with a satchel that smelled of vinegar and soap. He came once a week, sometimes less. His coat was long, his spectacles thin. He didn't know the children's names, only their symptoms. When he passed through, he checked Joseph's hand, twisted now from a caught thread. That spun too tight. He nodded once. Wrap it. He can still work. That was the extent of it. And so Joseph stayed on the machine floor, even when his back began to stiffen, even when his cough lingered past the frost, even when he no longer moved as fast as before, because no one faster had come along, and because Joseph never asked to stop. The entries in the ledger became more frequent, but they never became urgent, because urgency wasn't for children like Joseph. Urgency was for machines, for belts, for boilers that threatened to burst, not for boys with splinters in their ribs and dreams they'd long since stopped trying to remember. There was a time, maybe, when Joseph dreamed of running, or trees, or colors beyond grey and rust. But that time had long passed. By the time he was 10, his dreams belonged to iron. At night, lying on the hard boards of the boys' dormitory, Joseph didn't toss or turn. He simply stared. Straight up, eyes open in the dark. Because when he closed them, he didn't drift into sleep. He drifted back to the hiss of pressure, the snap of spindles, the shrill cry of a belt slipping loose. Even in stillness, his muscles twitched with remembered rhythm. His fingers curled, unconsciously mimicking the act of threading, even in the absence of thread. When dreams came, they were monochrome, shades of coal and copper, shapes that spun endlessly, always just out of reach. He no longer saw faces. No voices called to him in sleep, just movement, and the ever-present churning of work without end. The other boys snored softly, or whimpered, or clenched their teeth. Joseph lay still, so still he sometimes disappeared into the very boards he slept on, a part of the building, an extension of the floor, another quiet surface, bearing weight. The overseer said he was obedient. The matron said he was quiet. The doctor said he was hardy, but none of them asked what he saw. When the lights went out, none of them wondered what it did to a child to live inside a rhythm that never broke. Once, during inspection, he was asked to write his name. He hesitated, not because he couldn't, but because for a moment he forgot what it was. The pen trembled in his hand, not from fear, but from disuse. He signed it slowly, Joseph. The ink smeared slightly, and he stared at it, not with pride, but with curiosity, as if it was someone else's. It was the coldest winter in years, Even the rats in the grain bins stopped moving. The pipes cracked, and the breath of the boys rose like ghosts in the dormitory. Joseph's boots had holes, but so did everyone's. The water in the wash basin froze to glass, and for the first time Joseph could remember, the machines didn't start. The belt sagged, the gears stilled. The iron pistons, usually hot to the touch, were brittle with frost. The overseer came in that morning, looked around once and said, "No work today, the engine won't catch." Then he left, just like that. No orders, no punishments, no cane tapping the floor, only silence. The children stood around, not quite knowing what to do. No one told them where to go. There was no plan for this, no contingency for a day without labor. The cold pressed against their skin, through wool, through linen, through bone. Some huddled together, others just stood and waited, as if the wheels would change their mind and start again. But they didn't. Joseph sat in the corner of the factory, near a pile of lint. His breath curled against the frozen air. His fingers twitched. He didn't move much. Not because he was tired, but because he didn't know how to be still anymore. His muscles expected motion. His hands expected thread. But now, they simply waited. That day passed in slowness. No bells, no shouting, no routine. Just footsteps echoing through the halls, and the strange sound of boys whispering, for the first time in months. The matron allowed them to stay in the common hall, near a small stove. She didn't smile. She simply lit the fire, then sat down in the corner, as though she, too, didn't know what to do without the rhythm of production. That night, Joseph lay awake longer than usual, not from fear, but from confusion. The silence was louder than any scream, and without the factory's noise to lull him, his mind wandered to the gaps between memory, to a name, to a voice, to the idea of a hand that held his once, long ago. But the memory didn't come, only the cold. The next day, the wheels groaned back to life. The belts tightened, the floor shook, and Joseph returned to the rhythm, as if nothing had ever changed. Because one day of stillness couldn't undo years of motion. It happened quickly. Most accidents did. But this one left a record, because it made noise. A sharp clatter, a brief shout, and the machine stalling. With a groan that drew attention, Joseph had been sent in, again, to fetch a dropped shuttle. It had slipped into the gap between two rotating shafts. Nothing unusual. He'd done it a dozen times before, but this time, something changed. The machine was older now, its rhythm imperfect, its parts less forgiving. Joseph had always moved like breath, silent, fast, and low. But that day, as he reached forward, his shoulder brushed a gear tooth, just barely, a flick, an edge, and the machine caught him. Not hard, not enough to crush, but enough to pull. His sleeve snagged, and before he could twist free, the tension dragged him sideways, forcing his torso to bend. Too far, too fast. A loud metallic clang echoed across the factory. A lever snapped from tension. The overseer looked up. So did two boys at the next loom. And for a breathless moment, the whole floor paused. Then movement resumed. They pulled Joseph out. His arm dangling strangely, not broken, not obviously, but not right either. He stood on his own, even nodded, said nothing. But that night, he didn't sleep. His shoulder burned, his ribs ached, and when he tried to turn, his body no longer moved as it used to. Something inside him had changed direction. The matron recorded the incident, a short note. Minor entanglement, limited mobility in right arm, cleared for light duty. And that was the end of it. No doctor, no rest. The next day, he was reassigned to bobbin checks. Less crawling, more standing. But the standing hurt too. He didn't say so. No one asked. The boys didn't tease him, didn't mock the way he favored his left side, or how he hesitated when lifting. Because in the workhouse, injury wasn't funny. It was just common. Every child had a limp, or a cough, or a joint that no longer bent quite right. They were all made of mismatched parts now. Some rusted, some dented, but all still turning. It wasn't a compliment. Not exactly. But in a place like this, any name that didn't sting was a kind of honor. One afternoon, as Joseph walked past with a bucket of shuttle grease, his posture stiff, his steps measured, the overseer turned to another man and muttered just loud enough, "That one. Quiet Steel." The name stuck, not in jest, not like the cruel nicknames given to stammerers, or boys who flinched too much. Quiet Steel was said, with a sort of careful acknowledgement. He didn't talk, didn't laugh, didn't cry, but he didn't break either, even with a bent arm, even with a limp, even with fingers that no longer closed all the way. He kept going, and the factory noticed. Joseph no longer scrambled like the younger boys, no longer rushed. He moved deliberately, mechanically, like someone who had memorized every inch of the floor. He knew when a spindle was going to jam, just by the shift in its pitch. He could rethread a snapped line in half the time it took anyone else. And when something broke, really broke, he didn't panic. He stood, waited, then stepped in. The overseers, who once barked orders, now just pointed when they needed him. Joseph understood. No need for words. He became part of the factory's memory, not just its labor. The other children began to follow his lead, not out of admiration, but because copying him meant fewer mistakes, and fewer mistakes meant fewer bruises. In a strange way, Joseph became a kind of guide, not a leader, not a hero, but a fixture, like the iron post near the stairs, like the bell above the boiler door, always there, always silent, always bearing weight. People didn't leave with ceremony. They just left. He learned the gaps, the pulses, the breaths of the spinning floor. He moved like smoke, like thought, in and out. His knees were always bruised, his elbows raw, but he did not complain, because in the workhouse you don't complain when you're chosen, even if what you're chosen for might swallow you whole. Sometimes, in the quiet between tasks, he would rest his head against the machine, feel it hum, feel it live, and for just a moment, it didn't feel like he was inside the factory. It felt like the factory was inside him, and that it would never leave. Joseph never raised his hand, never spoke out of turn, but the system noticed him anyway, not for his voice, but for his wear. He began to appear more frequently in the ledger. The thick book kept by the matron, bound in cracking leather, its corners softened by time and routine. Each child had a row, a name, a date, an age, then marks, small ones, tiny notations for illness, injuries, shifts missed or meals declined. And Joseph's row, once thin and quiet, began to collect ink, bruising along the forearms, limping after second rotation, finger swollen, possible fracture. Refused breakfast twice. The marks weren't alarms, they weren't flags, they were observations, quiet ones, written in margins. The matron did not stop him from working. The overseer did not pull him aside, because a boy like Joseph was still more useful broken than absent. There was no doctor, not really, only a visiting man, with a satchel that smelled of vinegar and soap. He came once a week, sometimes less. His coat was long, his spectacles thin. He didn't know the children's names, only their symptoms. When he passed through, he checked Joseph's hand, twisted now from a caught thread that spun too tight. He nodded once. Wrap it, he can still work. That was the extent of it. And so, Joseph stayed on the machine floor, even when his back began to stiffen, even when his cough lingered past the frost, even when he no longer moved as fast as before, because no one faster had come along, and because Joseph never asked to stop. The entries in the ledger became more frequent, but they never became urgent, because urgency wasn't for children like Joseph. Urgency was for machines, for belts, for boilers that threatened to burst, not for boys with splinters in their ribs and dreams they'd long since stopped trying to remember. There was a time, maybe, when Joseph dreamed of running, or trees, or colors beyond grey and rust. But that time had long passed. By the time he was 10, his dreams belonged to iron. At night, lying on the hard boards of the boys' dormitory, Joseph didn't toss or turn. He simply stared, straight up, eyes open in the dark. Because when he closed them, he didn't drift into sleep. He drifted back to the hiss of pressure, the snap of spindles, the shrill cry of a belt slipping loose. Even in stillness, his muscles twitched with remembered rhythm. His fingers curled, unconsciously mimicking the act of threading. Even in the absence of thread, when dreams came, they were monochrome. Shades of coal and copper, shapes that spun endlessly, always just out of reach. He no longer saw faces. No voices called to him in sleep, just movement, and the ever-present churning of work without end. The other boys snored softly, or whimpered, or clenched their teeth. Joseph lay still, so still he sometimes disappeared, into the very boards he slept on, a part of the building, an extension of the floor, another quiet surface, bearing weight. The overseers said he was obedient. The matron said he was quiet. The doctor said he was hardy. But none of them asked what he saw when the lights went out. None of them wondered what it did to a child to live inside a rhythm that never broke. Once, during inspection, he was asked to write his name. He hesitated, not because he couldn't, but because for a moment he forgot what it was. The pen trembled in his hand, not from fear, but from disuse. He signed it slowly, Joseph. The ink smeared slightly, and he stared at it, not with pride, but with curiosity, as if it were someone else's. It was the coldest winter in years. Even the rats in the grain bin stopped moving. The pipes cracked, and the breath of the boys rose like ghosts in the dormitory. Joseph's boots had holes, but so did everyone's. The water in the wash basin froze to glass, and for the first time Joseph could remember, the machines didn't start. The belt sagged. The gears stilled. The iron pistons, usually hot to the touch, were brittle with frost. The overseer came in that morning, looked around once and said, "No work today. The engine won't catch." Then he left. Just like that. No orders, no punishments, no cane tapping the floor, only silence. The children stood around, not quite knowing what to do. No one told them where to go. There was no plan for this, no contingency for a day without labor. The cold pressed against their skin, through wool, through linen, through bone. Some huddled together. Others just stood and waited, as if the wheels would change their mind and start again. But they didn't. Joseph sat in the corner of the factory, near a pile of lint. His breath curled against the frozen air. His fingers twitched. He didn't move much, not because he was tired, but because he didn't know how to be still anymore. His muscles expected motion. His hands expected thread. But now, they simply waited. That day passed in slowness. No bells, no shouting, no routine. Just footsteps echoing through the halls and the strange sound of boys whispering. For the first time in months, the matron allowed them to stay in the common hall, near a small stove. She didn't smile. She simply lit the fire, then sat down in the corner, as though she, too, didn't know what to do without the rhythm of production. That night, Joseph lay awake longer than usual. Not from fear, but from confusion. The silence was louder than any scream, and without the factory's noise to lull him, his mind wandered to the gaps between memory, to a name, to a voice, to the idea of a hand that held his once, long ago. But the memory didn't come, only the cold. The next day, the wheels groaned back to life, the belts tightened, the floor shook, and Joseph returned to the rhythm, as if nothing had ever changed. Because one day of stillness couldn't undo years of motion. It happened quickly. Most accidents did. But this one left a record, because it made noise. A sharp clatter, a brief shout, and the machine stalling. With a groan that drew attention, Joseph had been sent in. Again, to fetch a dropped shuttle. It had slipped into the gap between two rotating shafts. Nothing unusual. He'd done it a dozen times before. But this time, something changed. The machine was older now, its rhythm imperfect, its parts less forgiving. Joseph had always moved like breath, silent, fast, and low. But that day, as he reached forward, his shoulder brushed a gear tooth. Just barely. A flick, an edge, and the machine caught him. Not hard, not enough to crush, but enough to pull. His sleeve snagged, and before he could twist free, the tension dragged him sideways, forcing his torso to bend. Too far, too fast. A loud metallic clang echoed across the factory. A lever snapped from tension. The overseer looked up. So did two boys at the next loom. And for a breathless moment, the whole floor paused. Then movement resumed. They pulled Joseph out, his arm dangling strangely. Not broken, not obviously, but not right either. He stood on his own, even nodded, said nothing. But that night he didn't sleep. His shoulder burned, his ribs ached, and when he tried to turn, his body no longer moved as it used to. Something inside him had changed direction. The matron recorded the incident. A short note. Minor entanglement. Limited mobility in right arm. Cleared for light duty. And that was the end of it. No doctor, no rest. The next day, he was reassigned to bobbin checks. Less crawling, more standing. But the standing hurt too. He didn't say so. No one asked. The boys didn't tease him. Didn't mock the way he favored his left side, or how he hesitated when lifting. Because in the workhouse, injury wasn't funny. It was just common. Every child had a limp, or a cough, or a joint that no longer bent quite right. They were all made of mismatched parts now. Some rusted, some dented, but all still turning. It wasn't a compliment. Not exactly. But in a place like this, any name that didn't sting was a kind of honor. One afternoon, as Joseph walked past with a bucket of shuttle grease, his posture stiff, his steps measured, the overseer turned to another man and muttered just loud enough, "That one, Quiet Steel." The name stuck, not in jest, not like the cruel nicknames given to stammerers or boys who flinched too much. Quiet Steel was said, with a sort of careful acknowledgement. He didn't talk, didn't laugh, didn't cry, but he didn't break either, even with a bent arm, even with a limp, even with fingers that no longer closed all the way. He kept going, and the factory noticed. Joseph no longer scrambled like the younger boys, no longer rushed. He moved deliberately, mechanically, like someone who had memorized every inch of the floor. He knew when a spindle was going to jam, just by the shift in its pitch. He could rethread a snapped line in half the time it took anyone else. And when something broke, really broke, he didn't panic. He stood, waited, then stepped in. The overseers, who once barked orders, now just pointed when they needed him. Joseph understood. No need for words. He became part of the factory's memory, not just its labor. The other children began to follow his lead, not out of admiration, but because copying him meant fewer mistakes, and fewer mistakes meant fewer bruises. In a strange way, Joseph became a kind of guide, not a leader, not a hero, but a fixture, like the iron post near the stairs, like the bell above the boiler door, always there, always silent, always bearing weight. People didn't leave with ceremony. They just left. One day you worked beside someone, and the next, their bed was empty, their bowl was gone, and no one said a word. Sometimes it was illness, sometimes injury, sometimes someone was taken to a factory, to the mines, to another parish, but they never said goodbye. There was no time for that. You didn't form attachments in a place designed to erase you. Even friendship had a shelf life, measured in shared chores and silent glances and the comfort of a familiar shape in your peripheral vision. Then one day, gone. Joseph had seen it happen for years. It didn't surprise him anymore, but it still left marks. Each absence rearranged the dormitory slightly, shifted the cadence of footsteps in the corridor, changed the scent of a corner where someone used to sleep. Loss was not loud. It was rearrangement, a quiet shuffling of the pattern. He didn't know the names of all the boys who'd vanished. Most had names no one ever used anyway. They were Thread, or Hollow, or Lefty. Identities shaped by function, not family. He only remembered them by the way they laughed, or limped, or stared at the same patch of ceiling every night. One winter, a boy Joseph vaguely recognized, small, thin, always coughing, disappeared from the dormitory. No announcement, just a new body in his bed the next day. Joseph noticed, only because the new boy snored differently, That night, he lay awake longer than usual, not out of grief, but because the rhythm had changed. The pattern was off, and that was harder to sleep through than the noise. It happened with as little notice as everything else. The matron called his name once, in the morning, and he went. No questions, no belongings, just the clothes he wore, and a piece of bread in his hand that he didn't remember being given. The record shows he was transferred to a textile mill outside the city, fit for continued labor. The note reads, disciplined, efficient, non-disruptive. They didn't say his name again after that, just sent the paperwork forward and his body with it. He was maybe 13 by then, though no one was quite sure, not even Joseph. His limbs had lengthened, but his shoulders still curled inward, from years hunched at the machines. His voice, when it came, was dry and soft, more air than tone. He didn't speak on the wagon ride, didn't ask where they were going. The driver didn't tell him. They passed fields, trees, a stretch of river he barely recognized from a childhood. He no longer claimed. When they arrived at the mill, Joseph was handed a new shirt, grey, scratchy, like the one before. He was shown a new bed, a new set of gears, a new rhythm, and without hesitation, he stepped into it, the same way he'd stepped into the last one, and the one before that. There are no further records, no death certificate, no marriage, no crime, just silence, which in some ways is fitting, because Joseph's story was never meant to be loud. It was the hum beneath the era, the grinding sound between inventions, between progress, between headlines. He was one boy, but also 1,000, 1,000,000, worn down, not by cruelty alone, but by structure, by design, by a world that needed children to become machines before they ever became men. The workhouse didn't run 7 days a week, at least not for the children. Sundays were the exception. Not a day of rest, but a day of something stranger, stillness. There was chapel, of course, a small service in a cold stone room where boys sat in rows and listened to words they didn't understand, spoken in tones that never changed. Joseph sat among them, back straight, eyes open, but he wasn't listening. He was thinking of the gears, of the loose bolt on loom 3, of the thrum of the drive shaft he knew was about to split again. When the prayers ended, they were led back to the dormitory. There was no playtime, no stories, no laughter, just waiting. Waiting for the day to pass, for the bells to ring again, for motion to return, for the rhythm to restart. Most boys hated Sundays. They called them the long hour, as if the entire day were a single stretched moment, with no edges to hold on to. Even the overseers were quieter on Sundays, even the matron, and the silence felt like a pressure on the lungs. Joseph used to think that maybe this was what death felt like. Not peace, not sleep, but simply nothing. He began to count on Sundays, not for fun, but to mark the passing of time, when nothing else moved. The cracks in the ceiling, the splinters on the floorboard, the number of boys who sighed, scratched, shifted. He recorded it in his mind, like a second ledger, a secret one he never wrote down, because if he didn't count something, he might disappear entirely. In a factory that never truly slept, sound was everything. But not all sounds came through the air. Some lived beneath it. hidden in the floorboards, in the beams, in the tension between every bolt and beam. And Joseph, he learned to hear with his feet. He didn't realize it at first, but after years spent barefoot on warped planks, his skin thickened, not just against splinters, but against indifference. He began to feel when the wheel 3 machines down was about to jam, not because he heard it, but because something in the grain of the wood changed. A tremble, a pause, a shift in frequency so subtle it was more memory than vibration. He would turn his head long before the others noticed and walk calmly, deliberately, toward the source. Once, an overseer asked how he knew. Joseph didn't answer, not out of defiance. He simply didn't have the words for it. His feet understood. That was all. Some boys teased him, called him Ghost Stepper, said he must talk to the machines in his sleep. But when things broke, and Joseph was already moving, the laughter stopped. He wasn't feared, not like the older boys who stole bread or the ones who lashed out, but he was regarded, not as a leader, not as a friend, as something else, something closer to the building itself, as if he were part of the structure, a fixture, a pressure gauge, a whisper. Joseph didn't think of it as power, just awareness. But in a world where children were supposed to be unnoticed, his presence began to glow. In the periphery of adult vision, they didn't praise him, they didn't thank him, but they stopped hitting him. And in a place like this, that was as close as you got to safety. It was near the lower stairwell, behind a board that had warped with rain. Joseph had gone down there to check on a bucket of grease, a task so routine he didn't even think about it anymore. But as he reached for the rag, he heard something strange. Not the whir of gears, not the groan of pipes, not the scrape of tools against stone. Something softer, erratic, fluttering. At first he froze. Sound, especially unfamiliar sound, was usually danger. But this wasn't metal. It was feather. A wing trapped and panicked, beating against wooden slats in desperate rhythm. He pried back the loose board, and there, in the narrow crawl space, was a bird. Small, grey, eyes wild with reflection. It must have flown in, through a broken vent, then lost its way. In the coils of piping and soot, Joseph stared. So did the bird. Both creatures, in their own way, caught between walls. He reached slowly, not out of kindness, but instinct, and for the first time in years, he felt something in his hands. That wasn't metal or wood or thread. It didn't fight, not after the first touch. Its heartbeat pulsed beneath his fingers, fast as a machine but made of blood. He held it for a long time, longer than he meant to. Then he walked, quietly, deliberately, to the loading dock where the air came in from the canal. He opened his hands, and the bird went. Not with a cry, not with a song, just gone. That night, Joseph dreamed of feathers, not wings, not sky, just the feel of them, soft against his palm, a sensation so completely foreign to everything else he knew. He never saw the bird again, but something about that day never left him. It was the first time, in a very long time, that he'd been reminded the world held more than gears and steam. It held breath. It held escape. The new boy arrived just before dusk, thin, trembling, wearing a coat with buttons too big for his wrists. He was maybe 6 or 7, hard to tell under the grime and fear. They assigned him to Joseph's corner, to sleep in the bunk below, to follow him to the factory floor, to copy his movements. Joseph didn't ask his name, didn't offer his own. But the boy, he spoke, too much at first. "Do we get supper? Why is it so loud? Where are the windows? Will they let us out for Christmas?" His voice wasn't loud, but in this place even curiosity echoed. Joseph didn't respond, not because he was cruel, but because answers didn't change anything. The new boy trailed him, like a shadow with questions, eyes darting everywhere, hands twitching to touch, to understand. Joseph noticed his fingers trembled when the machines roared, not from cold, from fear. But he didn't reach for him, didn't say, "It gets better," didn't say, "You'll get used to it," because neither would be true. Eventually, the question slowed, replaced by glances, then silence. The boy still watched Joseph, still mimicked his steps, still leaned into his pace, as if proximity could provide protection. And maybe, in some small way, it did. No one struck him that first week. No one shouted, because Joseph was nearby. And Joseph never made mistakes. One night, as they lay in their bunks, the boy whispered one more question. "Did you always live here?" It was the first time. He'd asked something Joseph didn't expect. For a moment, Joseph thought of answering, thought of saying no, of describing a time before iron, before silence, before hands learned to move, like tools. But the words never came. Instead, he turned his face to the wall and closed his eyes. The boy didn't ask again. There's a page in the ledger, thin paper curled at the edges, filing number 1442-B, date of transfer, April 1850. And beneath it, a few lines of script written in a hand both firm and disinterested. Joseph, no surname. Male, estimated age 13. Transferred to Millhouse Textile Company, East Parish. One final line beneath it. Reliable, quiet, obedient, no incident. No incident. That was it. No mention of the spooling room, of the broken gears, of the bird behind the wall, of the new boy who stopped asking questions. No mention of his hands, which had grown into tools, or his feet, which heard before ears did. No mention of the rhythm he had memorized better than scripture. Just obedient, reliable, terms that could fit a broom, a bucket, a cog. Somewhere the page still exists, filed in a box, in a basement, unread for decades, maybe longer, a whisper beneath history's thunder. And yet, despite its brevity, it is the only proof he lived, the only place where anyone took the time to write him down. And for some, that's more than they ever received. London has always been loud above. Carts rumbling, crowds shouting, chimneys gasping smoke into grey sky. But below, the city hummed differently. There were tunnels no one remembered digging, bricked over doorways in the banks of the Thames, and basements so old. They had floors made not of stone, but packed dirt, soft enough to swallow. Some say the city was built on bones. Others say it was built on secrets. Both might be true. During the height of the Industrial Revolution, when factories clawed at the skyline, some of the strangest machines weren't displayed in workshops or fairs. They were hidden beneath warehouses, under bridges, along the damp throat of the river itself, half finished, half functioning, and sometimes half forgotten. They were inventions without patents, projects without blueprints, dreams made in iron, by hands that either died too soon or realized too late that no one wanted what they had built. Imagine descending a narrow spiral staircase in 1849, lantern in hand, moss on the steps, and the air changing as you go deeper, cooler, wetter, full of stone and time. Your boots touch a floor that squelches, and ahead of you, a shape, metal, curved, rusted, wrapped in chains that don't bind anything anymore. You don't know what it is, or was, and you realize no one above has any idea. What's buried here? That was London's underside, a place not of ghosts, but of machines left behind to become ghosts. Some still had names: the coiling loom, the canal walker, the steam donkey. Others didn't. Just descriptions scribbled on fragments of ledger. Mobile grain combiner, failed. Rotating garment punch, unstable. Bridge crank assistant, abandoned. Each one a glimpse into the mind of someone who wanted to make something new, but didn't have the resources, the permission, or the luck. But they left them here, under floorboards, behind bricked walls, in the parts of the city no one wanted to talk about. Why? Because invention was messy, and failure was expensive, and the Thames could hide things better than any archive. His name was not recorded in any major registry. No patents bear his initials, no portraits either. Just one faded etching in the corner of a mechanic's journal, signed with a simple E. But in the winter of 1851, locals in the East End began whispering about a man who worked alone in a coal cellar, beneath the old rope walks. They said he had bad eyes, not from age, but from watching too many gears spin in candlelight. He wore gloves in summer and smelled of brass polish and oil. He rarely spoke, but when he did, he spoke of hooves. The project began, it seems, with a broken delivery cart and a fascination with animal locomotion. The man studied the way horses walked, trot to gallop, with more care than surgeons gave to the human heart. He filled notebooks with sketches of joints, notes on tension, and questions no one had time to answer. Could a machine mimic muscle? Could iron spring like tendon? Could fire move with grace? He called it simply the horse, but it was not graceful, not at first. Witnesses, few and unreliable, said it looked like a skeletal deer with ribs of copper pipe and a spine made of butchered clockwork. Its legs bent backwards. Its neck was rigid. It moved with a grinding, stuttering rhythm, but it moved, and that, perhaps, was enough to haunt people. One night, a constable claimed he heard it galloping, not down the cobbles, but beneath them. A hollow thud, a shrieking halt, then silence. When he searched the area the next day, he found a hatch left open in a soot-stained alley. Inside, nothing but scrap, ash, and a half-melted gear. The man was never seen again. Some believe the horse exploded. Others say it ran too far and too fast, until it vanished into the river fog. A few still claim they hear it, in the quiet just before dawn, when the Thames is low, and the pipes below the docks breathe slow. A metallic clatter, a hoof that isn't quite a hoof, a rhythm out of place, Perhaps it's only the plumbing. Or perhaps something built from obsession doesn't disappear. It just waits. It began with a spill. A small boy, 12 maybe, apprenticed to an apothecary on Holloway Lane, dropped a vial of camphor through a crack in the floor. The bottle rolled sideways, clinked twice, and vanished. Not beneath the cabinet, not under the skirting, into the floor. The master muttered, told him to forget it. But the boy, curious, bored, itching to do anything but grind chalk, returned that night. He brought a candle and a spoon and a pocket knife. The floorboard was loose, not just worn. Loose by design. He pried it open. What lay beneath was not a cellar, not storage, not foundations. It was a room. Low-ceilinged, brick-lined, with a workbench still stained from mixtures no one could name. Dust hung in the air like breath that never left. Glass tubes glinted in the candlelight. Pipes ran from wall to wall, but didn't seem to connect to anything. One had burst. Another was glowing faintly, though no fire burned. In one corner, a book. Its cover warped with moisture, but still legible. On it, a single word. Separations. The boy was caught, of course. His master followed the light, and for a while, no one spoke. Just stood there, in the stale, humming dark, realizing this space had been here all along. The master sent for a constable. The constable sent for an inspector. The inspector filed a report. That was never followed up. Too many other matters. Too many files already piled high, on desks that tilted. Later, a builder was hired to seal the room. He bricked it up in silence, whistling a hymn that didn't feel right. When asked what he saw, he just shook his head, said the metal down there was wrong, too thin, too flexible, not copper, not brass. He didn't want to guess what it was. And that book, it disappeared. Some say the master kept it. Others say the constable did. Either way, it never reached the libraries. Just a trace of ink. A record of something strange. Beneath a business. No one remembered 10 years later. There are still shopkeepers who hear thumps beneath their feet at night. Who smell sulfur when no bottle has been opened. Who wonder why their basements feel a little too warm, even in winter. But no one digs. Not anymore. The Thames Tunnel was a marvel. Completed in 1843, it was the first successful tunnel constructed beneath a navigable river. A feat of engineering, risk, and mud. Mark Isambard Brunel built it, with his son, Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Names that would echo through history, like rivets hammered into steel. But not every corner of the tunnel was documented. Not every part stayed on paper. There was one shaft sealed before the tunnel even opened to foot traffic. They called it Shaft 9, and what it contained was quietly forgotten. Decades later, long after the tunnel had fallen out of fashionable use, a team doing maintenance work broke through a bricked-up arch. On the southern end, behind it, a rusted door. Iron, thick, studded with bolts that had corroded into soft fuzz. Beyond the door, a round chamber, lined with soot and silence, and in the center of the floor, a circle of bronze, larger than a cartwheel, etched with symbols no one could trace to any manufacturer. A plate, an elevator, or something like it. There were no levers, no ropes, no pulleys or visible power. Just a platform. Resting in stillness, the men tested its weight. It held firm. Then one stepped onto it. As a joke, nothing happened at first. Then a faint click, a sound like steam whispering, and the platform lowered. No jerking, no sudden drop, just a smooth, gliding descent. Into dark. He panicked, called out. The others pulled him back. They tried again. No movement. The mechanism would only respond if no one was watching it fully. If you looked away, then looked back, it might have shifted. One worker described it as shy. Another, more sober, said, "This isn't made for us." Engineers were brought in, measured everything, declared the device non-functional, filed a report, moved on. But the platform wasn't removed. Too heavy, too strange. Instead, the room was resealed, the arch rebuilt, and Shaft 9 was scratched off the tour maps. To this day, there are whispers that certain vibrations beneath the river don't match the trains above, that something still moves. Not fast, but steadily, deeper. In the southern bend of the Thames, near what is now a quiet row of flats, stood the remains of an old public bathhouse. Built in the 1830s, it had once welcomed chimney sweeps, factory women, and dock workers alike. For a few pennies, you could shed your soot and feel clean again. Water was piped from the river, heated in a massive coal-fired boiler tucked beneath the main hall. The bathhouse shut its doors in 1879. Falling attendance, rising costs. The boiler was turned off, the tap sealed. The bath tiles cracked and curled, but the hum never stopped. Caretakers first noticed it, a low, pulsing sound, coming from beneath the floor, not loud, not even rhythmic, just present, always. It didn't echo, didn't vibrate the walls, but if you sat still long enough, you could feel it in your chest, like a memory of thunder. The first thought was rats, then gas leaks, then some trick of acoustics. Inspectors came, listened, left. No hazard detected, no pressure readings, no operational parts remaining. But the humming remained. One winter, a plumber named Harris was hired to dismantle the boiler entirely. He removed the rusted pipes, the burners, the pressure bell. What he found inside was ash, yes, but also something else. A ring of iron teeth, arranged like petals, as if they'd once turned something, not powered by flame. When he touched it, his glove stuck slightly, not melted, just drawn. He refused to return. Later that year, the floor above caved in during a storm, revealing the space once hidden, the boiler long since stripped bare. And yet, the humming was louder, not mechanical, not musical, more like breath, or thought. The site was bricked up as they often were, eventually sold, built over. But today, tenants in the flats above say, they sometimes wake at 3 a.m., convinced someone is murmuring below the floorboards. Not talking, not words, just the sense of something, still working, long after its task was finished. Her name was Anna, and she worked in a dye workshop along the East Bank. The records say she was 9, but she may have been younger. Her birth certificate, like so many others, was missing or never written. Her job was simple, if dangerous, stirring the vats. A long pole, a short stool, and 8 hours of breathing fumes. She collapsed one afternoon, fell backward into a stack of fabric, breathing shallow, eyes flickering. They said she had vapors. The doctor used the phrase temporary delirium. She was given broth and a bed of rags. She didn't speak for 2 days. Then she began to draw. At first, it was circles, endless loops, spirals and wheels. Then came the spokes, then the gears, paper after paper, each more detailed than the last. Complex interlocks, helices with teeth, cogs inside cogs. A manager glanced at them and said, "She's copying something she saw." But no machine in the workshop looked like these. One foreman, an ex-watchmaker, took a closer look. He said the mechanisms weren't just decorative. They worked. He tried building one, a small one, something simple with wood and brass. It spun, silently, but only when the room was dark. Anna didn't explain the drawings. She didn't claim to have invented them. She said only, "They come when I sleep." When asked what they was, she grew quiet. Once she said, "They don't like the light," then refused to say more. She stopped drawing 3 weeks later. As suddenly as she had begun, returned to the vats, worked for 5 more years, then disappeared from the record entirely. Some say she died of dye poisoning, others that she married and left the city. But a box of her drawings, brown, curled with time, was found in the 1920s, tucked behind a chimney wall in the factory. An engineer reviewed them, called them impossible. And yet, he kept a few. They remain in his family to this day, locked in a trunk, unshared, because once one of the sketches moved, ever so slightly, when no one was looking directly at it. The foundry was built too close to the river. Everyone said so. Its foundations were brave, piled timber driven deep into riverbed silt, but not brave enough. It operated for 14 years, a place of black smoke, molten brass and hammer strikes that sent birds flying, all the way across the river. Then, one spring morning, the ground trembled. A slow subsidence. The river pressed in. The walls cracked. The floors bowed. And then, with a groan, the south half of the building slipped beneath the Thames. No one died, miraculously, but part of the foundry was gone, swallowed. The rest was sealed, abandoned, except something was left behind. A warning bell, installed high in the rafters, meant to sound when internal pressure rose too high. It was a relic even then, tuned by hand, struck by a weighted arm, that was triggered by gas expansion or heat. The kind of device you could trust, more than a man. 3 days after the collapse, someone heard it ringing. Not from the roof, not from the remaining structure. From below, under the water, a deep, wet chime, muffled but insistent. Fishermen heard it. Boatmen steered clear. They said it rang once every hour, sometimes at dawn, sometimes after sundown, always when no one was near the water's edge, always alone. Diving wasn't easy in those years, but 2 men tried. They descended with ropes, weight-thick helmets that trapped breath like iron coffins. They found the bell, still upright, still fixed, but unconnected. Its striker mechanism had corroded. The spring was gone. There was no way, they said, for it to be sounding, and yet it had, repeatedly. Eventually, the site was dredged. The bell was brought up. It rests now. Silent dash, in a private collection, polished, still intact. But the diver who handled it refused to sleep in silence for years afterward. He swore he heard it toll. in the space between his thoughts. Software slow, endless. Even now, on fog-heavy nights, there are those who say, if you stand on the southern bank, just as the tide turns, you can feel the air pulse, as if something far below is still counting time. For a machine that's long since drowned, it was no longer than a finger. Solid brass, cold to the touch, even after hours in the hand, found in a pile of workshop scrap, purchased at a flea market in Whitechapel sometime in the 1890s. The man who bought it was a watchmaker, a quiet profession, especially for someone with shaking hands. He didn't notice the key at first. It was buried in a box of gears, but when he reached for a brass ring, his fingers brushed the key and stopped. He said later, I felt like I was interrupting something. It didn't match any clock, didn't fit any lock, had no grooves, no notches, just a smooth stem, a ridged handle and a hole through its center, as if it had once been worn like a pendant. He kept it on his workbench, didn't use it, just noticed it, especially when strange customers came in, people with devices he'd never seen, a music box with teeth, a compass that spun even when still. Once, a child brought in a tin bird that could chirp in 3 tones, though its wires were broken, and always, as they laid these things down, the key would shift, rattle, almost like it wanted to be noticed. One evening, long after sunset, he decided to test something. He held the key to the underside of a small mechanism, something old, from a drawer he hadn't opened in years. The device clicked, opened, revealed an interior with tiny spindles that began to turn, though no spring had been wound. He dropped the key, let it fall to the floor. It didn't make a sound. In his later years, he passed the key to a colleague, a woman who repaired optical instruments. She tried it on a lens tube that hadn't focused in decades. It snapped into place, though there was no keyhole. And suddenly, the viewfinder revealed not the street outside, but something else. Brick walls that didn't exist. A boiler room where her parlor should be. A flickering light, too slow for gas. She put the key in a drawer, sealed it, never opened it again. To this day, the key has been recorded in at least 4 different inventories. Always listed, never explained. Some say it's a universal starter, others that it doesn't start anything, but remembers. Build something near it, and it will find the piece that's missing, even if that piece was never invented at all. The Victorians were proud of their sewers, and they should have been. Brick-lined arteries that carried waste away from crowded city streets. They were the unsung marvel of a city drowning in its own expansion. Engineers mapped every twist, every turn, drew charts so precise you could time a rat's journey from Whitechapel to Westminster. But in one report, dated 1873, there's a line, a narrow annotation at the bottom of a page, in almost apologetic handwriting. Branch 12A, terminated prematurely, no outlet, no explanation. Branch 12. A wasn't supposed to exist. It didn't appear on the original blueprints, wasn't part of the construction order. And yet, a small team sent to inspect nearby masonry found a tunnel diverging southeast. Not collapsed, not blocked, just absent from every diagram. They followed it for 280 meters, long enough to feel disoriented. Twists that didn't match the surface grid, angles that made no architectural sense. No graffiti, no rats, no drips of condensation, just silence. Then they reached a chamber, roughly octagonal. 8 narrow recesses in the walls, like niches, each one empty dash, except for the 7th. Inside it, an iron pipe, ending in a valve that didn't connect to anything. The valve was warm, not hot, just warm enough to notice. And when one worker tapped it with a wrench, a low tone echoed through the chamber. Not metallic, not hollow, more like a whisper, pressed into the stone. They left quickly, filed their report. 2 days later, the entrance was bricked over. The city claimed unstable ground. That was the last time Branch 12A was mentioned in any official record. But a year later, one of the workers, a man named Ellis, was found wandering near the river, clothes soaked, mumbling something about the drain that breathes. When pressed, he drew a map, not of the surface, but of the sewer, a sewer that matched no known layout, with symbols at each junction, and at the end, the circle labeled still turning. The map was seized. Ellis disappeared. No further records exist. In 1904, as part of a larger modernization effort, London authorities began decommissioning old steam lines beneath the southern districts. Many had gone unused for decades. Relics of earlier heating systems, abandoned boilers, and forgotten lift mechanisms that once served river warehouses. Most were simple to shut down. You trace the pipe, find the valve, drain the pressure, seal the joint. But one line refused. It ran beneath the edge of Blackfriars, a thick, rusting iron trunk that split from a main conduit and vanished into what was then a bricked-over crawl space. The engineers found it by accident. The floor above had started to sag. When they broke through, they expected dry air, silence, decay. Instead, the space was warm, moist. The pipe was intact and humming, not from pressure, not from flow, but from presence, a vibration too soft to hear, but one that made the wrench in your hand feel lighter. They called in specialists, pressure gauges, steam meters, no readings, no leaks. And yet, every 18 minutes, like clockwork, the final valve would rattle. Just a little, as if something on the other side was still turning. No one could trace its source. One man followed it, crawling 200 meters into narrowing tunnels until the pipe simply disappeared into a wall of soot-black stone, older than any construction nearby. No join, no seal, just pipe into rock. He placed his hand on the stone and jumped back. He said it felt not hot, not cold, but aware, like the wall itself was considering him. He left, didn't return, moved to Edinburgh, refused to speak of it again. Eventually, the pipe was sealed, not with a wrench, but with poured lead. The space was filled with rubble, the crawl space buried. But nearby residents say that in the right kind of silence, the kind that comes after snow before the fog lifts, they can still feel something in the soles of their feet, a faint pulse, measured, mechanical, waiting for something, no longer there. And with that, we bring segment 3 to a close. From half-built engines to whispering vaults, these ghost machines remind us that progress is rarely neat, and the past is rarely silent. Imagine waking to a filtered morning, Not by alarm, but by the faint click of a servant's shoes, in the hallway beyond your door. The sun barely peeks through the thick damask curtains. You are not to pull them open yourself. A maid will do it, softly, so as not to disturb the balance of the room. Because this isn't your bedroom, it's your sanctuary. And more importantly, it's a presentation, a reflection of your place in the world. Everything must be just so. You sit up straight, not slouched, not stretching. Even alone, your posture obeys rules you didn't write. On the dressing table, hairbrush, rosewater, gloves laid flat. Your corset lies beside the chair like a question. That must be answered every morning. It isn't about beauty, though it shapes you. It isn't about health, though it constrains you. It is about order, discipline, the sense that everything, even breath, has its place. You don't dress alone. Your maid laces the corset. You exhale as she pulls, then pause, then exhale again. Your ribs do not complain. They have grown used to this rhythm. Your gown is chosen by the day. Morning dresses are pale, quiet, serviceable. Never velvet, too rich. Never silk, too loud. Jewelry, minimal, if any. Hair, pinned, but not dramatic. The volume of a hairstyle can suggest a volume of personality, and too much personality was rarely encouraged before breakfast. Downstairs, breakfast is light, quiet, and staggered, served by the footman in silence, except for the clink of porcelain. You speak only when spoken to, especially if guests are present. Your husband may nod. Your children, if old enough, may offer a memorized greeting. You smile, but do not laugh. Laughter is for the drawing room, or better, for after tea. Each step of the day is choreographed. The letters you write, the visits you make, the way you ring the bell for the parlour maid. There is a time to walk, a time to read, a time to sit silently with embroidery. That may never be finished. The point isn't completion. The point is composure. You are the center of a quiet gravity, not flashy, not bold. But if you slip, if your dress is too bright, your voice too loud, your opinion too sharp, the shift will be felt across parlors, church pews, and whispered hallway conversations for weeks, because in your world, reputation is architecture. Once cracked, it never quite holds the same shape again. It began young, sometimes as early as age 8. Not tight, not at first, just snug. Just enough to remind you where your ribs were and where they shouldn't be. By adolescence, it was routine, a ritual of restraint, a quiet contract with society, signed each morning with pulled laces and flattened breaths. The corset was not merely support, it was declaration. You belonged, you complied, you contained yourself. Not everyone wore them tight, that's a myth. But even when worn gently, the message remained. Your form was not your own. It had to be arranged, curated. A natural silhouette was not fashionable, nor desirable. A straight back, a narrow waist, a firm, composed figure. These were signs of refinement, and to be refined was to be respected, and to be respected was to be safe. At least socially, corsets were stitched with whalebone or stiffened cotton, tied by hands that did not wear them. A maid, a mother, a sister, rarely oneself. They could not be donned or removed easily, and that too was the point. You did not undress impulsively. You did not change quickly. Every transition dash, from daywear to evening dress, from bustle to chemise, required help. Dependence was built into the fabric. And yet, within these rules, there were signs of defiance. Some women loosened their corsets after leaving the house. Others stitched small charms into the lining. Secret things. A pressed flower, a lock of hair, a written prayer, folded flat against the spine. A few daring minds replaced the stiff busk with softer materials, claiming illness or doctor's orders so they could breathe a little deeper. The rational dress movement would come later, but its roots were here, in the private quiet of discomfort. Tolerated too long, women began to question, not with speeches, but with choices. Wider belts, looser chemises, walking skirts that allowed a longer stride. Reform was not sudden, not loud, but it was real, stitched one hem at a time. And even as society demanded they be bound, many women learned how to reshape their world from within the seams, not by removing the corset, but by redefining what it meant to wear one. The day did not unfold. It was arranged. From the moment she rose, to the hour her bedroom lamp was dimmed, a proper lady's time was portioned, like sugar in a bowl. Measured, expected, never excessive. Each hour had its mood, its duties, its acceptable silences. There was the letter-writing hour, a quiet space after breakfast, when hands moved in gentle loops, across cream-colored paper, ink slow, sentences careful, tone always polite. Even if the message carried disapproval, then came the walking hour, not rushed, not aimless, a curated stroll, often on well-tended paths, in parks that knew their purpose. She would not walk alone, not often. A companion, a chaperone, a small dog, something, or someone, to reflect the kind of woman she was seen to be. No quick steps, no muddy shoes, no laughter loud enough to echo between trees. By late morning, if the house allowed it, she might call on another lady, or receive one. This was no casual visit. Calling cards were involved, left with a servant days before. Introductions formalized in advance. The sitting room must be clean, the biscuits warm, the tea just strong enough to suggest hospitality, but not indulgence. Conversation danced in narrow circles. The weather, an engagement, a new bonnet shop. Anything deeper was for journals. Lunch was light, midday rest optional. But the afternoon was for appearance. If she were young, she might practice music, play scales on a pianoforte. That never quite stayed in tune. If she were older, she might embroider, stitching flowers she would never pick onto cloth she'd never wear. Or she might read, but not novels, not if anyone was watching. Books on manners or scripture or travel journals written by men, with access to worlds she would never see. And then came tea, 4 o'clock, sharp. This was more than a meal. It was a performance. Lemon slices arranged just so, cups with handles turned outward, the clink of the spoon, carefully softened by the saucer. Even conversation had choreography. Praise the tea, praise the hostess, mention the flowers. Do not criticize, not even with your eyes. Everything in its place, even you. And when the guests had gone, and the table cleared, and the maid dismissed, you were left with yourself. And if you were lucky, you liked her. But many women did not. At first glance, the drawing room looked like peace. A floral rug, a crackling fire, china figurines arranged on a polished mantel. Everything spoke of calm, of civility, of quiet power. But beneath the surface, beneath the laced doilies and piano keys, was a battlefield, not of swords, but of subtlety. This was the woman's realm, and she ruled it with velvet gloves and carefully worded questions. Conversations began softly. They always did. "Have you heard? I was just saying to Mrs. Blackwell." Harmless at first, but the trick was knowing. When the subject changed hands, when a comment about someone's garden became a judgment about their spending, when a compliment about a bonnet was actually a warning that it might be too fashionable. The drawing room was not for argument. It was for performance, or inference, for calibration. Ladies of stature mastered this language. They knew how to raise an eyebrow without raising their voice, how to glance at a clock without seeming impatient, how to suggest that someone was perhaps no longer in favor without saying anything at all. A misplaced laugh could be social death. A dress worn twice could be a scandal. A missed call could end a friendship. But there were also moments of rebellion, small ones. A woman might choose a louder color, just a hint of crimson on a sash. She might speak of books, real books, novels with flawed women, and open endings. She might ask a guest to play Chopin instead of a waltz, or let the tea oversteep, just enough to suggest that maybe not everything had to be perfect. Still, the rules held. One did not speak of money, or illness, or grief, not directly. Even joy had to be measured. You could glow, but not beam. Everything was in moderation. A drawing room was not a place for your whole self, just the part that fit the frame. And yet, for some women, it was all they had. Their throne, their parliament, their only stage. They learned to navigate it, like a queen in exile, smiling in the mirror, silently counting the days, until the season ended, or the husband retired, or the children married, or the years turned slow enough to loosen the expectations. Not every rebellion is loud. Some wear gloves, some sip tea, some smile as they defy expectation, so gently, so elegantly, that no one notices at first. In Victorian England, a lady was not meant to question. Not in public, not in print, but she could wonder, and sometimes she could write. Journals became secret allies, hidden in dresser drawers, beneath sachets of lavender. There she could say what she thought, about the men at the dinner table, about the sermon on Sunday, about the ache in her chest, that had nothing to do with health, and everything to do with longing. Some women wrote poetry, others, letters they never sent. A few dared to submit stories to magazines under initials or false names, or the name of a brother who didn't exist, and once published, those words fluttered like birds through parlors and bookshops and train cars, changing minds, one line at a time. Others rebelled by reading, not just the approved volumes, but the banned ones. Mary Wollstonecraft, George Sand, later Elizabeth Gaskell. Some read in secret, some read aloud, to sisters who dared not ask for the book themselves. And every page turned was a door creaking open, not to revolution, but to thought, There were women who painted not flowers on fans, but bones, landscapes, the creases of old faces. Women who walked farther than was considered proper, who stared too long at the stars, who studied insects, who refused to marry, when marriage was the only path. Society offered them. They did not shout, they did not riot, but they did not vanish either. Resistance was quiet, because it had to be, but it was constant, in the way a mother told her daughter. She didn't have to marry just yet, in the way a widow wore grey, for less than the required 2 years, and smiled while doing so, in the way a young woman returned a calling card with a note that said simply, "No thank you." These were not revolutions. They were pinpricks in the wallpaper, cracks in the silver service, proof that beneath the layers of satin and silence, there were minds at work, brilliant, brave, and utterly unwilling to remain folded. If the workhouse was a machine made of soot and sweat, then the Victorian household was a quieter machine, one that ran on etiquette, expectation, and the weight of what was not said. In both worlds, there was structure, there was order, and there was the constant hum of roles assigned, rules obeyed, and lives shaped by something larger than themselves. For women of the upper classes, this structure was lined with velvet, but velvet can chafe it too. It looks soft, but it binds all the same. There were bells to summon servants, but none to summon freedom. There were dresses for every occasion, but few designed for movement. There were expectations of poise and beauty, but little room for anger or ambition or grief. Even love had rules. Even silence had to be the right kind. And yet, within this carefully laid labyrinth, women found ways to breathe. In letters, they told truths. In books, they imagined escape. In conversation, they hinted at more. Some played the game to survive. Others played it to change it. Not all were heroines. Not all were rebels. Some were content, truly. But even contentment was something learned. A practiced art, passed from mother to daughter, like a recipe for lemon biscuits, or a guide to proper glove etiquette. Looking back, it's easy to marvel at the elegance, the gowns, the tea trays, the architecture of restraint. But beneath it all, there was something else, something beating against the corset stays, something humming beneath the lace, a question, a thought, a whisper, not loud, not yet, but enough to start the next chapter. Victorian England did not hand women the reins of power, but it left the windows open, just wide enough for whispers. And women learned how to use them, not by storming Parliament, not by signing laws, but by shaping the conversations, before those laws were ever written. It happened in parlours, at tables heavy with sugared cakes and china teacups. It happened in gardens, where words were traded as delicately as flower cuttings. A woman might not hold office, but she might influence a man who did, through charm, through insight, through a suggestion dropped softly between bites of shortbread. She might recommend a tutor, mention a cousin's unfortunate situation, frame a cause as a matter of family decency. And slowly, ideas moved from tea to chamber. Charitable work was another door. Proper ladies were expected to do good, visit the poor, support orphanages, host fetes to raise funds. But within those duties, some found purpose. They learned the names of the needy. They documented conditions. They wrote letters to editors under carefully chosen pseudonyms. They didn't protest, but they published. They didn't shout, but they shaped opinion. Women also wielded influence through matchmaking, not just for marriage, but for alliance. Two families, two fortunes, two futures subtly stitched together. Over a series of social calls, a clever woman could steer a match towards stability or ambition, or even personal freedom, if she read the room well enough. And of course, there was the household. For women of means, this was a miniature kingdom. She oversaw servants, budgets, menus, scheduling. She set the tone of the home, and in doing so, she shaped the minds raised within it. A son brought up in a house of order and empathy carried that structure into the world. A daughter raised among quiet intelligence might grow up to question, even if she didn't yet speak. Power didn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wore silk sleeves. And in Victorian England, many women became masters of what was possible. Within the cage they were handed, they learned to rearrange the bars, to soften them, to make them beautiful, yes, but also to make them movable. In a world where speech was measured, where words were often as weighted as jewels, writing offered something precious: freedom. Letters were more than correspondence. They were lifelines. Between sisters separated by miles, between friends divided by class, between women who dared to dream beyond their drawing rooms. Diaries, too, were sacred spaces, bound in leather, hidden beneath floorboards or beneath pillowcases. There, a woman could speak in a voice that was her own, without censure, without fear. She could confess doubt, anger, hope, and despair. These pages held the unvarnished truth. What society demanded she keep locked away. Some women wrote to be heard, their words smuggled into print under initials or male pseudonyms, or no name at all. The Bronte sisters, for instance, published as Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell, because the world wasn't ready to listen to women writers. But in secret, their letters to each other spoke volumes of resistance, of longing, of an insatiable hunger for life beyond expectation. Writing was also a tool for education. Women exchanged books by post, sent essay drafts for critique, and practiced languages they might never speak aloud. These letters formed networks, a hidden world of intellect and solidarity, stretching across continents, across years. For many, the act of writing was its own kind of defiance, a way to claim agency, even if only on paper, because the spoken word could be interrupted, ignored, or silenced. But ink, once dried, could endure, and those words, locked in diaries, letters, and manuscripts, have outlasted many a Victorian mansion. Victorian society was strict, its rules rigid as the corsets that shaped its women. But behind closed doors, in parlors lit by candlelight or gas lamps, women gathered, not for gossip, not merely for tea, but to exchange ideas that couldn't be spoken in public. These were the salons and societies, places of quiet revolution. Some were literary, focused on poetry and novels that challenged norms. Others were political, discussing suffrage, labor rights, and education reform. Most were small, private circles where trust was currency and silence was sacred. Membership was a secret. Written names never appeared in newspapers. Meetings moved between houses, never lasting long in any one location. Women risked social exile, but for many, the price was worth the promise of freedom. In these rooms, women shared banned books, practiced speeches, and debated futures that dared to imagine equality. They formed alliances across class lines, uniting seamstresses and aristocrats, teachers and heiresses. Their conversations planted seeds that would one day bloom into movements. These gatherings were more than meetings. They were lifelines for women who felt trapped by expectation, for those who dreamed beyond marriage and motherhood. Here, voices grew stronger. Ideas became plans. Dreams edged closer to reality. Though many of these societies remained hidden, their impact rippled outward. They taught women to see themselves, not just as accessories to men, but as individuals, with thoughts, rights, and power. The Victorian era didn't end with a bang. No dramatic revolution, no sudden tearing away of corsets. It slipped away quietly, like the last thread in a lace glove, worn thin by time and use. Fashion changed, silhouettes softened, voices grew louder. But beneath the shifts, the lessons remained. Women had learned restraint, patience, the art of quiet power. They carried these with them into the 20th century, into suffrage marches, into new professions, into lives less constrained. Victorian womanhood was both a cage and a forge. It shaped and it strengthened. Today, when we admire the intricate lace or the delicate china cups, we glimpse not just beauty, but the resilience of those who wore them. The corset's pressure, the drawing room's gaze, the silent rebellions, all threads woven into a larger story, one of endurance, of adaptation, of voices finding their way through whispered shadows and polished parlors. So as we close this chapter, remember, history is never just about those who shout the loudest. Sometimes it is about those who move quietly against the grain, shaping worlds with grace and strength just beneath the surface. Across the centuries, many lives have been shaped by forces unseen yet relentless. The grinding machinery of industry, the hidden workings beneath a great city, and the delicate constraints of society's expectations. Children became parts of machines, their bodies and spirits molded by iron and steam, while forgotten inventions lingered in shadowed tunnels, bearing silent witness to dreams that never fully took flight. Within polished parlors, women mastered the art of subtle power, navigating webs of etiquette and restraint. To wield influence quietly, yet effectively. These histories do not shout. They whisper in the margins, in the rhythm of footsteps on wooden floors, in the soft clink of teacups, in the hum of mechanisms long stilled. They reveal that history is not only the story of conquerors and kings, but also of those who endured, those who adapted, resisted, and shaped their worlds in quiet ways. In these stories lies a steady pulse, the resilience of human lives lived between the gears, the strength found in silence, and the subtle defiance beneath constraint. They are reminders that even in the hardest places, there is endurance. Even in silence, there is power.